But Texas A&M and Notre Dame was a big game this past weekend. It was one of our best bets of the weekend. It did not go our way as Texas A&M was able to win that game over Notre Dame. And there's definitely multiple ways that you can look at this when you're evaluating this football game. I think, one, if you look at the Notre Dame side, there's a couple of takeaways that you can make, right? Marcus Freeman, he's one of the best coaches in college football, does a great job of recruiting. He's the leader of men, right? Everybody loves saying that. He checks off a lot of boxes as it relates to being a head coach at a big-time program like Notre Dame. But they're off to an 0-2 start. Of course, they made the national championship last year after losing to Northern Illinois, went on an incredible run, were able to knock off some really good teams, and then kind of just ran into a buzzsaw there in the national title game against Ohio State. But they're an 0-2 team, and they're clearly the best 0-2 team in the country. I don't think that really even is debatable. And, going into the game, it felt like such a big game for Notre Dame because you look at their schedule and you sit there and go, man, if you lose this game, I don't know if there's a path for you to get into the playoffs, obviously, without being in a conference, despite the fact that you could potentially run the table. And that was kind of my mindset going into that game against A&M. That was kind of why I expected them to play so well, because I thought they really would have their backs up against the wall, understanding that, yeah, it's our second game of the season, but our season's kind of on the line here. And, I thought in large part they really did show up and played a really good game. There are some concerns when you're talking about the Fighting Irish. I think defensively is the biggest one, right? Al Golden obviously leaves Notre Dame. He's now the defensive coordinator for the Cincinnati Bengals, and they're kind of similarly to what they were doing last year. They're playing a lot of man coverage, despite the fact that Al Golden is no longer the defensive coordinator. And when you're playing man coverage, especially in college, you have to be able to put pressure in the quarterback. If you're playing man and can't get home on the quarterback, it is going to be a problem for you, and that's exactly the problem that Notre Dame ran into in that game. They were playing a ton of man coverage. I believe they only had one sack. Maybe they've only had one sack throughout the course of both of their games between Miami and Texas A&M. That is not getting it done. Obviously, Texas A&M ended up scoring, 41 points and winning that football game. So defensively, you certainly have some question marks as it relates to the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Offensively, C.J. Carr, I think, is a really solid quarterback. He's only started 2 games. Of course, he's lost both of them. For the Notre Dame Fighting Irish, but I think he's going to be just fine. I hope people in South Bend kind of stick with him and understand that he is a solid quarterback. He has some untimely turnovers, right? That's something that he's going to get picked apart a little bit for with the turnovers that he has had in critical moments late in the game. You could argue, if he doesn't make those turnovers, maybe Notre Dame is 2-0. That's very certainly could be the case. At the first game, the play calling and just kind of the game plan really as it related to C.J. Carr and Notre Dame wasn't where it needed to be, right? Jeremiah Love, in my opinion, is the third best player in college football behind Caleb Downs and Jeremiah Smith, and they didn't really feature him as much as I think they should have in week 1, and they certainly adjusted to that in week 2 as they went to him early and often throughout that game, and I think that certainly helped out C.J. Carr. But if they're in a spot where they can really lean on Love and make things a little bit easier on C.J. Carr, I think they're going to find a way to ultimately win some football games. And when you look at their schedule, like I said, not really a ton of big-time games. But if you're a Notre Dame fan, there's 2 teams that you really need to be rooting for, and that is NC State and that is USC. USC is kind of slowly coming out of nowhere. They haven't played anybody. I get that 100%, but nobody was talking about Lincoln Riley and the Trojans coming into this year, and all of a sudden they've been looking pretty good against lesser opponents, obviously. But if they can continue to win, Notre Dame, of course, has the Trojans on the schedule. That could be a big-time win that Notre Dame would need to vault into the college football playoff. Same with NC State. That's another team that not really many people early on were talking about. They have an opportunity to string together some wins and be kind of a formidable team that is on Notre Dame's schedule. So if you're a Notre Dame fan, you really need to be rooting for those 2 teams there. And we'll see. You got a really good coach. You got a solid quarterback in C.J. Carr. If you can find ways to rush the passer a little bit better than you have these first 2 games, or maybe just shift your playing style in defense, right? If you can't get home on the passer, maybe you're going to have to adjust what you're doing defensively and stop running so much man coverage and have some more zones where you force quarterbacks on the opposing team to kind of take what's in front of them, and then you swarm to the ball and you tackle. Maybe that's an adjustment you'll have to make if you're Marcus Freeman, but overall the defense needs to be much better. Obviously, if you watch the game, I feel terrible for Tyler Buckner, right? Really, that game should have been going into overtime, really. Notre Dame scored really, really late. I forget how much time exactly was on the clock, but they took the lead late in that game and to go up 6, and then they're going out just to kick a basic extra point, and Tyler Buckner is the holder for the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. I did a triple take when I saw that, watching the game with some buddies. We're like, is that? We thought it was Tyler Buckner's brother. We were like, that's got to be his younger brother, right? But no, it actually was Tyler Buckner. Buckner, of course, was a quarterback at Notre Dame, and then he transferred to Alabama, and then he came back to Notre Dame, and he was like, I'm going to play lacrosse, actually, and not football, and now he's back on the Notre Dame football team, and he's holding extra points. Like, just a crazy career for him. Good snap, just drops it, right? And, obviously, at the end of the day, he's a college athlete. I think some people nationally feel like, they can just kind of absolutely rip on these college athletes, because they're getting paid now. At the end of the day, they are still, 18 to 21-year-olds, right, for the most part. So, Buckner, obviously, he's sick to his stomach after that play. And then A&M is able to drive down the field again with minimal time on the clock and score some points. And obviously, they execute their extra point. They win the football game, come into South Bend, and, really take the hearts there of Notre Dame. But we spent some time there talking about the Irish. If you flip it and talk about A&M, that's a pretty good football team. Right? They've done some good things over the course of these first few weeks. I think Marcel Reed really has taken a step in the right direction for the Texas A&M Aggies, right? I think, he kind of burst onto the scene last year in that LSU game, if you remember that, and he really didn't throw the ball. I think he only threw it a handful of times. He was just running, and he was running right through Brian Kelly's defense, making all types of plays, and people were like, Marcel Reed is going to be the next great thing. And then throughout the rest of the year, he kind of struggled when it came to throwing the ball, right? Really, you see this in the NFL, right? You have to be able to win within the pocket. You can get a little bit away from it in college football and still find ways to win. But I think especially as the college game becomes more like the NFL game and just operationally how it's run, more like the NFL now, you have to be able to win from within the pocket. And Marcel Reed clearly spent tons of time this offseason working on that. I've been really impressed with what he's been able to do through the air. Mike Elko, obviously their head coach, is going into now, I believe, his second year as the head coach for Texas A&M, and I think he's a great fit, right? Texas A&M, that's not an easy job, right? It's a big fan base, a huge stadium, lots of expectations, and a very difficult conference, obviously, in the SEC, and I think Mike Elko has done a tremendous job, and he's put his team in the right spots here through a couple of weeks to win football games. Now, if Texas A&M is to be taken seriously in the SEC and really be taken seriously nationally as someone that could perhaps win the SEC or compete for a national title, there's a step in which they need to make. They need to beat the teams that they should beat, right? And that might seem obvious, but that's kind of what has held some other teams back from taking that next step, right? What makes, Ohio State so good? Yeah, they've got the incredible players, the 5-star talent, the great coaching staff. They win big games. They won the national title last game, but you don't see Ohio State get upset and lose these games where they're favored by double digits, right? For when Nick Saban was the head coach of Alabama, obviously that never happened there as well. And a team like Penn State, right? I think a lot of us, myself definitely included, think Penn State is grossly overrated, and preseason number 1 is just outlandish, in my opinion, as it relates to ranking the Penn State Nittany Lions. But part of the reason they continue to get hype going into each year is because they beat the teams they should beat. Right? Penn State doesn't lose games where they're significant favorites. Now, do they win big games? No, they don't do that either, which ultimately is what has held them back. But the reason they get so much hype around them and so many people seemingly nationally try to believe in Penn State is because they take care of business when they are supposed to take care of business. But when they find themselves in bigger games, obviously they have struggled with that in the past. So that's kind of the next step, really, for Texas A&M. They've got some really good wide receivers on that football team there as well. It felt like any time one of their playmakers got the ball in space, they had an ability to perhaps shake loose and create a big play for that Texas A&M offense. So certainly a very interesting team. I think, Tennessee, Georgia, LSU, Texas, Oklahoma, those teams kind of get a lot of recognition as far as being at the top of the SEC. But I think a team like Texas A&M is certainly a team that is a force to be reckoned with, really, as you progress throughout the rest of this schedule. But now conference play really starting to kick up. You had some really good out-of-conference games here through the first couple of weeks, but I'm really excited for conference play, and all heck really probably going to break loose in the Big Ten and the SEC, and that certainly will be fun to watch, and we'll certainly have it covered here on the show.